For decades, Washington assumed Canada would always follow a simple rule: fly American jets. F-18s, F-35s, the training, the logistics, the entire system. It all ran through the Pentagon like clockwork. From NORAD operations to Arctic patrols, Canadian air power was seen as an extension of America's own. But suddenly, that assumption is crumbling. Canada is no longer just following the path the U.S. laid out. Ottawa is openly exploring fighter jets from other countries, jets that the Pentagon doesn't control, maintain, or influence. And that has set off alarms at the highest levels in Washington. Behind closed doors, officials are furious, and the stakes are higher than most people realize. Think about it like this. Imagine a neighbor you've relied on for decades suddenly deciding to hire a contractor from across the street instead of the one you recommended. If that neighbor controls a critical part of your shared property, your sense of security is shaken. That's exactly how the Pentagon feels about Canada's move. This isn't just about buying airplanes. It's about trust, influence, and the balance of power in the Arctic and North America. For the Pentagon, Canada's curiosity about non-American jets is more than a political headache. It's a potential strategic threat. In this video, we're going to pull back the curtain on why the Pentagon is losing its cool, what's happening behind the scenes, and how Canada's fighter jet decisions could reshape the entire future of North American defense. This is the story Washington never wanted you to hear. To understand why Washington is so worried, we need to go back decades. Canada's fighter jets, the CF-18s, are old. Some of them have been flying since the 1980s. Their avionics are outdated, maintenance costs are skyrocketing, and keeping them in the air is becoming increasingly expensive. In simple terms, Canada needed a replacement yesterday. But Ottawa didn't just grab the F-35, the Pentagon's expected default. Instead, Canada launched a drawn-out, highly political competition. It was a process full of delays, debates, and shifting priorities. Politicians, military leaders, and analysts all weighed in, each with different ideas about cost, capability, and sovereignty. The result? Years of uncertainty, missed timelines, and growing frustration both inside Canada and in Washington. The U.S. assumed the F-35 was a done deal. From the Pentagon's perspective, it seemed like a safe bet. The F-35 was already the backbone of NATO's advanced fighter network. Choosing anything else? Unthinkable. Then came a quiet ripple in the process. Analysts in Canada began asking questions about U.S. pricing, long-term maintenance, and the level of control Ottawa would really have over the jets. The idea of considering alternatives suddenly went from theoretical to very real. And that's when the first cracks in the automatic alignment assumption appeared. In short, Canada wasn't just buying jets. It was rethinking how it wanted to defend its skies, manage its Arctic territories, and work with allies. And every time Ottawa questioned the status quo, it put Washington on edge. This sets the stage for the next big twist. A competitor enters the scene that changes everything: the Swedish Gripen E. Just when it seemed like the F-35 was inevitable, Sweden quietly entered the competition with its Gripen E fighter jet. On paper, it might have looked like a small contender from a small country, but in reality, it was a strategic disruptor. The Gripen E was designed for the kind of conditions Canada faces every day. It handles extreme cold, icy runways and Arctic operations better than most jets in the world. On top of that, it's cheaper to maintain, easier to upgrade, and far less dependent on foreign control. Unlike the F-35, which keeps mission data and software tightly controlled by the U.S., the Gripen offered Canada real sovereignty. Even more striking, Sweden's offer included local production and technology transfer. This meant Canada could not only operate the jets independently, but also build parts, integrate weapons systems, and manage upgrades on its own soil. For a country that had long felt like a junior partner in North American defense, this was huge. Canadian defense analysts began to take notice. Questions about U.S. pricing and the F-35's long-term costs started to gain traction. Suddenly, Ottawa had options that could give them control, flexibility, and Arctic readiness, all while saving money. Think of it like this. You're used to buying the latest smartphone, which ties you into a single ecosystem. Then someone offers a phone that does everything you need, lets you customize it, and even comes with a local repair shop while costing less. The choice suddenly feels very tempting, and the status quo is shaken. Gripen E wasn't just a jet. It was a wake-up call, an opportunity for Canada to rethink its entire approach to defense, sovereignty, and partnership. And naturally, Washington noticed. To understand the Pentagon's reaction, you need to know one simple, unwritten rule. In North America, allies are expected to fly American jets. Mexico, Canada, and the United States, everyone assumed it. It's not just tradition, it's about keeping defense, strategy, and influence tightly connected. When Canada started looking at the Gripen E, that rule was suddenly broken. The Pentagon's fears go far beyond aircraft performance. First, there's supply chain control. With American jets, Washington controls the spare parts, upgrades, software, and mission data. If Canada chooses a European jet, all of that control moves out of U.S. hands. Second, there's interoperability. NORAD, joint exercises, shared command systems. Everything relies on standardized equipment. Mixing fleets complicates operations and risks miscommunication in critical situations. Imagine a soccer team where half the players speak a different language. That's the Pentagon's worry. Third, there's the Arctic factor. Canada controls nearly 40% of the Arctic coastline. The United States sees Arctic security as part of American leadership, and it wants Canadian jets plugged directly into U.S. command systems. Non-American jets create blind spots in a region that is becoming increasingly contested by Russia, China, and other players. Finally, there's economic and industrial pressure. Every F-35 sale feeds billions into American contractors like Lockheed Martin, creating jobs and reinforcing U.S. influence worldwide. If Canada buys foreign jets, that flow of money and strategic leverage shrinks. In short, Washington isn't just annoyed, it sees a real strategic threat. A non-American fighter in Canadian skies could weaken U.S. influence, complicate military operations, and give a European country a foothold in North American defense. And that's why, behind closed doors, the Pentagon went from cautious concern to full-blown alarm. The Pentagon didn't just sit back and watch Canada consider the Gripen E. Behind closed doors, the pressure was, honestly, pretty intense. Reports suggest there was a whirlwind of lobbying, phone calls, and diplomatic messaging going on. Defense officials met with Canadian leaders, reminding them, sometimes subtly, sometimes pretty bluntly, that North American defense relied on American jets. But Canada, for its part, wasn't making concessions. Ottawa pushed for access to source codes, independence over mission data, and the ability to integrate systems on its own terms. These weren't small requests. They really struck at the heart of U.S. control over fighter jet technology. Every delay in the F-35 timeline just added more fuel to the fire. The longer Canada took to decide, the more Washington started to panic. Imagine waiting on a key domino in a line, knowing that if it doesn't fall at the right moment, the whole chain reaction fails. That's basically how Pentagon officials reportedly felt about the Gripen E's potential. This tug of war wasn't only about jets, it was about influence, trust, and strategic alignment. Lobbyists, contractors, and diplomats all played a role, trying to steer Canada back toward the F-35. Meanwhile, Ottawa was carefully weighing its options, balancing cost, sovereignty, and Arctic readiness against U.S. pressure. In essence, this was a quiet battle of wills, fought in meetings, phone calls, and memos, one that the public rarely saw but which would have long-lasting consequences for North American defense. While Washington was pressing hard, Canada was quietly growing frustrated. The F-35 program had problems that went way beyond just price tags. Costs ballooned unpredictably. Maintenance was way more expensive than promised. And Canada had little control over mission data or software upgrades. Timelines kept shifting, deliveries were delayed, and those strict integration rules made it nearly impossible for Ottawa to customize jets for its Arctic needs. For Canada, the issue wasn't just technical, it was about sovereignty. The Arctic is becoming one of the world's most contested regions, and Canada wanted jets that could operate on its terms, not as extensions of U.S. command. The Gripen E actually offered that autonomy, full control over upgrades, local production, and the ability to manage Arctic missions independently. This frustration tapped into a broader feeling. Canada often felt treated not as an equal partner, but as a junior ally expected to just follow Washington's lead. Fighter jet procurement became a symbol of that imbalance. Choosing Gripen E wasn't just about cost or performance, it was a statement. Canada wanted to make its own choices, defend its territory on its own terms, and assert a degree of independence in defense policy. Think of it like a teenager finally standing up to their parents, saying, "I can handle this on my own." That's the kind of challenge the Pentagon was facing from Ottawa, and this tension between autonomy and alliance loyalty would really define the rest of the fighter jet saga. Despite all the pressure, Canada's desire for independence, and the advantages of the Gripen E, the F-35 ultimately came out on top. But this wasn't just about which jet looked better on paper. It was a strategic calculation. First, the F-35 fit seamlessly into NORAD's long-term modernization plan, which, honestly, the U.S. effectively controls. Switching to a European jet would have forced Canada to redesign Arctic defense networks, data systems, and command structures, a risky and costly move Ottawa just wasn't willing to make. Second, U.S. influence was enormous. Diplomatic messages, defense meetings, and subtle pressure all reminded Canada that interoperability with American forces was non-negotiable. The message was pretty clear. North American defense requires North American jets. Third, the F-35 offered access to a global network of allies. More NATO countries were transitioning to the aircraft, promising unified data sharing, joint training, and seamless integration with U.S. forces. Choosing a different jet risked isolating Canada from the broader network of Allied operations. In the end, the F-35 won, not because it was the best fit for every Canadian need, but because it minimized political and operational risk, while ensuring full integration with North American and NATO defense systems. Canada balanced autonomy with practicality, and in this case, alliance obligations tipped the scale. Even after the deal, though, those underlying tensions remained. Canada had signaled it would seek more autonomy in the future, leaving Washington just a bit wary of what could come next. Even after choosing the F-35, Canada's story isn't finished. Ottawa is signaling a new approach to defense, one that balances alliance commitments with national independence. Canada is exploring openness to non-American suppliers, investing in Arctic sovereignty, and showing interest in drones and future fighter programs that the U.S. doesn't control. From Washington's perspective, this is, frankly, a strategic headache. The Pentagon sees Canadian autonomy not as opposition, but as a potential threat to American influence in North America. Every move Canada makes toward independent defense capabilities challenges long-standing assumptions about loyalty and interoperability. The bigger picture here is even more significant. The Arctic is heating up geopolitically, with Russia, China, and other powers showing growing interest. Canada's choices could shape the security dynamics of the region for decades. Allies and rivals alike are watching to see how Ottawa balances sovereignty, operational readiness, and alliance obligations. In many ways, Canada's fighter jet saga is a lesson for smaller or mid-sized allies navigating superpower influence. It shows how nations can push for autonomy without breaking partnerships, but also how delicate that balance really is. So, the story continues. Canada is now walking a tightrope between independence and cooperation. The next moves in Arctic security, fighter jet procurement, and defense technology could redefine North American defense. And honestly, the world is watching.